Temple Grandin thinks in pictures, and I love pictures of her. On the cover of the Autistic Brain, she looks like a new marshal come to town, a sheriff who's arrived to restore order to families in crisis. She's a you can clap. Was there a clap? Yeah, okay. She's a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Her technological innovations and behavioral insights have made life better for millions of cattle in North America. She's a leading advocate for showing respect and kindness to the animals we eat. She's the author of the influential essay, Animals Are Not Things, a view on animal welfare based on neurological complexity. She's the source of the quote that inspired the title for Oliver Sacks's best-selling essay collection about diverse minds, An Anthropologist on Mars. One of the finest metaphors for describing the autistic experience. She said from Mars, by the way, and Sacks changed it to on Mars. She crisscrosses the continent year after year to speak up about the importance of diverse minds and nurturing young people who have those minds. She came to Albany all the way from Colorado during the worst holiday travel season of the year. She had to make a fast connection at Dulles. It's a miracle that she's arrived. She's one of the heroes of our age. Please whoop it up for Temple Grandin. Are you comfortable taking that off? Or, yeah, okay, yeah. It's great to see you.
Great to be here.
I wanted to start by thanking you as a parent for your perseverance in the face of so many things, bullying, sexism, but particularly because you were so often underestimated, and you've set an example for everyone, not just folks on the autistic spectrum. So another round of applause, if you don't mind. They just dedicated a bronze statue of you at Colorado State University. Is that weird to see a statue of yourself?
I don't know, like David Anderson did a really great job making it.
You did a really great job.
He really did a good job.
That's good. So they got it right. That's good to hear. I think my favorite portrait of you is that brain scan that you showed during your TED Talk, which has over 6 million views, by the way. Can you talk a bit about images of your brain and what they say about you?
Well, I'm a total visual thinker, and that showed up in the brain scans. I got big visual thinking circuits. Everything I think about is a picture, and the HBO movie showed exactly how I think. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, this one right here, presents some of the research that shows that you have some people are visual thinkers, like me. It's called an object visualizer. You got other people that are more mathematical pattern thinkers. And then, of course, they are the word thinkers. And I'm a very big proponent of developing the kids' strengths. My ability in art was always encouraged. Now, interestingly enough, I worked with a lot of visual thinkers when I worked in construction. And I'm going to guess that about 20% of the welders and machinery designers that I worked with were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And those people are not getting replaced because in a lot of states they've taken the shop classes out. They're playing video games in an autism diagnosis rather than now building things. No, I'm being really serious about this. The people I worked with are retiring now. Industries are actually desperate for people to fix equipment, build it. We're importing things like a poultry processing plant from Holland now in very expensive shipping containers because we don't know how to build it anymore. And it goes back to taking those shop classes out.
As a visual thinker, art was something like a doorway to science for you.
Well, art was really good at the visual thinkers that think in pictures. The object visualizers tend to be good at art, graphics, mechanical things, and working with animals, because animals don't think in words. Of course, the math thinkers is going to be computer science, physics, chemistry, and of course the word thinkers, writing, and verbal things. And the verbal thinker has a very different way of solving problems than I do. Verbal thinkers are top-down. You have a vague concept, like maybe inclusive classroom, but no specifics on how you actually do it. See, my mind works bottom-up. Here's specific examples of a job that worked for an individual with autism, something like an office supply store, or an ice cream shop, a job that was terrible, chaotic store during the holidays, a lot of multitasking in a takeout window. Those are things that don't work. You see, that's the bottom-up approach. There's a lot of stuff where the bottom-up approach really works. I'm also getting kind of outside the autism field, because when I go out into industry, and I've been out to big tech companies like Google, I mean, half those programmers are on the spectrum. I've done talks at Microsoft, at Google, SAS, a bunch of different companies, Apple, and then when I worked with the meat industry, brilliant designer that's took a one-semester class in drawing and is laying out entire factories. You know, there's a whole world of industry out there parents don't know about, and the kid's playing video games in the basement when he could be doing something a whole lot better. That's the problem.
Get out of the basement, I think is the...
Well, you got to replace the video game playing with something else. And the visual thinkers tend to be the video game addicts. And it's been 3 successes with auto mechanics.
So I work in higher education and for a literary arts organization, and the arts and the humanities are really under siege right now at all levels of education in favor of STEM subjects, in favor of science and technology. So as a scientist and an inventor, can you tell us why we need to save the arts and the humanities?
We need those things. There was a study done. I have a slide. I can't remember who did the study. It's on the slide, so it gets credited there. And a Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have a creative hobby, like music or art, than just a regular scientist. So that's a good reason. Also, Steve Jobs was fascinated with calligraphy. And that's one of the reasons why computers have nice fonts. And he was an artist. He didn't program. He made the interface that was easy to use. And the mathematicians had to make the phone work. You see, that's where you need both kinds of minds. I'm very concerned about visual thinkers getting screened out, because I cannot do algebra. And a lot of the brilliant people I worked with cannot do algebra. That is screening individuals out. But you need us, even in engineering, because there's a visual side to engineering. I'll give you an example of where a visual thinker was needed. The Fukushima disaster could have been prevented with simple watertight doors. Engineers, mathematicians calculate risk. I see the water flooding the site, and what do you think is going to happen to the electrically driven emergency cooling pump? It's not going to work. It's that simple. I see it. And what I've learned about the mathematical mind is they don't see it. And I've actually dug up research supporting this position. We need the different kinds of minds, the picture thinker, the math thinker, and the word thinker. We need them. Don't screen me out, you need us. Keep the power grid going, need us.
So writing is what brought your voice to a wider world. You wrote articles for cattle magazines.
That's right.
and scientific journals. Can you talk about how writing helped you, and does writing make us better thinkers?
Well, writing was very important for my career, starting with writing for cattle magazines, because I would do a project and then I wrote about it. And what I'm seeing today in some of the graduate students is the writing skills are horrible, run-on sentences. And I find out this is a smart student, and they never wrote a book report. They never had anybody mark up their work and correct the grammar. Now, I was a horrible student in high school. But by 9th grade, after I got kicked out of a regular high school for fighting, my writing skills were better than a lot of students today. And one of the things that made me effective in improving cattle handling was the fact that I wrote about how to do it, how to build things. I wrote about stuff. And now in some of my books, a lot of my books have a co-writer because I need that for organization. Now, Farm Magazine articles were short. I never had a co-writer for that. My textbooks there's no co-writer. Thinking in Pictures is one of my books where there's no co-writer, but it's relatively short, standalone chapters. Working on a new book right now on visual thinking and why we need visual thinkers, and I'm working with Betsy Lerner, and boy, does she know how to reorganize my stuff. And Becky Salatin, my editor's right down here attending tonight, and she knows how to reorganize my stuff too. So this is an example of the different kinds of minds working together. You see, when you recognize how the different kinds of thinking is different, they can have complementary skills. But the first step is, and I've done a lot of talks to big corporations, is you have to realize that people think differently. And when I was in my 20s, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I didn't know that verbal thinking even existed when I was in my 20s.
You can see that I have kind of a pro-arts and pro-humanities agenda up here. So the next thing I wanted to ask you, you've said some nice things about theater and your participation in plays and things like that. How are the theatrical arts valuable, and did theater help you?
Oh, I was into costumes and scenery. I didn't care about acting in the play, but I loved making costumes and scenery. So that would have been, my contribution to it. But that's something that can turn into a career. I think a lot of students today don't get exposed to enough stuff to figure out what they might want to do for a career. I'm very concerned we've got a lot of students today growing up totally removed from the world of practical things. And then you get some highly verbal, theoretical arguments where nobody knows how to implement it. And I think that's a really big worry, and having good writing skills served me well. And when I was in college, I took a general course in literature where we read, we had kind of an anthology, a bit of Shakespeare, a bit of Homer, and then the professor described in the context of the time what emotionally and what there was a bigger message than just the story. I thought I'd hate the course. I ended up loving it. And it was a really good class, and it just said, okay, in that time, this is what they were trying to communicate. And they kept all the politics out of it in my class.
You've raised the alarm about the end of libraries, particularly in schools. I guess maybe I think you specifically mentioned the Midwest. There's a sense that this stuff is available online, that money can't be spared for school libraries in particular. Why are libraries important? What do physical books mean for you, and why shouldn't we close them down?
I didn't read until 3rd grade, and Mother taught me with phonics, just very simply. I had get a book worth reading. She'd read some out loud and then have me sound out my words. I sung my ABC song, and that has a lot of the sounds. And I just can't believe some of the complicated gobbledygook I found online on how to teach phonics. They've just made that way too complicated. I think it's especially important for the younger kids to have physical books in their library so they can just go in and browse. I also think it'd be good to have in the high schools some science and nature, really, which are professional science magazines that students can just browse in. Also, it totally keeps them out of anything bad, too. No, I think there's still a place for physical books. I go on planes, I'm still seeing physical books there. I just did a book called The Outdoor Scientist, which has a lot of kids' projects in them to get them outside. That's selling 99% physical. Okay, a book like Thinking in Pictures. I was really surprised. I got my royalty check last year, and it was 1/3 audio. But I'm still selling a lot of physical books. I sell more physical books than I do ebooks.
So when we were communicating with you to work out the arrangements for this visit, you told us, and others told us, that you hate email, you don't like email, you don't like messages, you like phone calls. So we had the privilege of calling you many, many times, and we got to hear your famous voice on the other end. But of course, we interrupted you in meetings, and you had sessions with students, and you were driving and things like that. Why do you not like email? And if it was great to connect with you that way.
Well, the thing actually, I was COVID. I had to get a Gmail address because I had to have that for my Zoom calls. So I've been using that more. But I find it's a lot easier. If we're trying to arrange something, it's much easier just to do one phone call. We're going to figure out when I'm supposed to get there, figure out all the details, one phone call, and the arrangements are done. You're going back and forth on email. Is it on the calendar? Is it not on the calendar? And when I was working on all my facilities, actually it was really good on the phone. I used to just send packets full of information to customers, and that's how I sold jobs. I'd call up the front office, say, engineering department, please. And then what you had to do is get the guy's extension. What's his extension? What's Mr. Jones's extension? I also learned that when you're weird and you're different, I learned to sell my work rather than myself. So I would show clients my drawings, pictures of jobs, portfolio of work. That's how I sold jobs.
Right. So you've got a new book out, co-authored with Deborah Moore, Navigating Autism, 9 Mindsets for Helping Kids on the Spectrum. What's new about it, and can you tell us about it?
One of the main things, and this is Deborah Moore came up with this, I'm going to give her, she's the one who came up with the idea of label locking, and parents not seeing the whole child. They get so far into the label. And the problem you got with autism is you're going from Elon Musk, who has autism, and he came out on Saturday Night Live. I always thought he was autistic after I read Ashley Vance's book, to somebody who can't dress themselves and has the same name. And I think especially the verbal thinkers overgeneralize on that. And they're not seeing the whole kid. And there's a big emphasis in that book on developing strengths. But how do you figure out where strengths are? Well, kids have to have exposure to a lot of stuff. Then you can see what they're good at. How could you tell a kid's good at playing a musical instrument if you didn't have access to musical instruments? Just use that as an example. And then also, there's some other things, talks about some of the medical issues that often go along with autism. The other thing is getting out into the real world. Really important. I'm seeing too many kids where the parents overprotect them. The kid's 16 years old, fully verbal, and has never gone shopping in a store, never learned how to save money, just basic life skills. Because I have granddads coming up to me all the time, and the granddad finds out he's autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But the granddad had a paper route. So we need to start teaching working skills young. Chores when they're young, volunteer jobs, maybe at age 11 or so to replace the paper routes, real jobs the instant they are legal. I was really pleased the state of Nebraska now changed the legal age from 16 to 14. They just did that.
So many of us are eager to celebrate autistic genius, but for some kids, it's a triumph equally worthy of celebration just to put on clothes.
That's right.
Or to speak a few words. How can we properly respect and celebrate those kids?
Well, with both types, there's a tendency to overprotect. And then I always refer parents to some books by nonverbal individuals who type independently, like Tita Mukapatahay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move, Carly's Voice, and then the sequel to The Reason I Jump. The sequel's a better book. I can never remember the numbers right. Something like fall down 5 times, get up 7 times. And they describe a sensory disordered world. And Noki, the Japanese, he's now a man, describes sometimes his carers, that's what they're called in Japan, help them too much. You know, it's easier just to put the code on them than letting them learn how to put it on themselves. But anyone who's working with nonverbal individuals, I'm not talking 3-year-olds here, but older nonverbal individuals, these books are must-reads. And they're written by people who type completely independently. Nobody's touching them or the thing they type on.
You've argued that autism is probably one of the engines of human evolution, and it's so much fun to think about that, and so affirming for folks in the autism community to hear you say it. Can you talk about the role that autistic individuals have played in the advance of the species, let's say, prehistoric times?
You see, a brain can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional. And so if you're really social emotional, that eats up a ton of processor space in the brains. Well, Einstein had no speech till age 3. He'd land in an autism class today. Let's look at Elon Musk. Steve Jobs had a lot of the autistic traits. Look at the old Bill Gates antitrust deposition videos. Look them up from the late 80s. Michelangelo was probably autistic. Dropped out of school at age 12. He was a slob, too. Not good hygiene. But he was exposed to great art because the churches were commissioning the art, but he also grew up using stone-cutting tools. So when you look at developing strengths in people, first of all, you have to be exposed. This applies to a lot of people. Then once you get a bit further along, then you need mentors. I had a great science teacher who finally turned me around and got me interested in studying. I still haven't passed algebra. I don't know if I could graduate from high school today. No, I'm serious about that. I think it's a real concern. And then I also had some good mentors that saw my abilities, helped me get my business started. And one was Jim Uhl, a former Marine Corps captain, no nonsense, really practical, starting a small steel and concrete construction business, saw my drawings, and he approached me to design jobs and sell jobs. And we built jobs together for 10 years. He also helped me set up my business. I mean, just some of the things you have to do to set it up. He helped with that. So mentors, and Michelangelo later on had mentors too. That's really important.
Yeah, I was trying to elicit your quote, which I just find so fantastic, about you imagine prehistoric human beings, the social butterflies sitting around the fire, kind of telling stories and wasting time, while the autistic kid is off to the side, chipping away at the flint, arrowhead, and advancing, human civilization. So it's just such a moving.
Well, I find. I've been watching all the supply chain management stuff. I find that really interesting. You see, because none of that stuff is abstract to me. I see it. I've actually been to China. I've watched them load those ships on the other side.
And you could solve those supply chain problems for us, you think?
Well, let's look at it. You see, I tend to pick out a detail. I was reading an article about the ports in the West Coast, and I read a guy brag to the Wall Street Journal, I make more money if I just store my containers at the port rather than renting warehouse space. Well, I looked at that and I'm going, let's stop that in a hurry. You're going to get your stuff out of there. And that was a single sentence. And it's something that's low-hanging fruit and it'd be easy to fix. No, we're not storing containers at the port. You're going to get them out of there. And then there's a problem with not enough drivers. There's not enough of the special trailers they call chassis for hauling containers. Well, maybe I'm going to get some of those built. You see, but the first thing I'm going to do, this guy bragged that he liked storing his stuff at the port. No, you can't be doing that. You can't unload the ships if people store their stuff there. See, that's just, and when you look at it visually, that's just so obvious. Let's correct that, and then they got the port going 24/7. There's a point where you have to just cut through the bureaucracy, too.
Yeah. So we're eager to take your questions. We've got microphones on two sides here. You can line up and pose questions. We know how much she's meant to you, and we know that everyone's got remarkable stories. We want to make sure that everyone who wants to ask a question gets the opportunity. So if you'd like to line up and on either side and pose a question at the microphone, you have that opportunity. And if you don't get a chance, as I mentioned, Temple Grandin, she's pre-signed books for sale, and she's even if they're pre-signed, you can still line up and get them signed, or at least get an opportunity to speak with her and get any books that you've brought with you that are not yet signed. So I expected a lot of questions.
Well, we're going to pick somebody. Yeah, just pick somebody if they don't get up here to these mics.
Yeah, you can line up at the microphones. The microphones in the aisles. Yeah. This woman here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about if you have pets, and I have pets and they get elderly, and I don't know what to do. Like, when do you decide we're keeping them alive for our own pleasure? They don't seem to be enjoying life anymore. I mean, how can you tell when is the right time to bring it to the vet and let them make the decision? Or
Oh, you mean on you have euthanasia of a dog? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So euthanasia of pets. When is that the right decision?
Well, sometimes that's really a hard thing. Sometimes it's better if somebody else makes a decision. Let me tell you what happened with my aunt's dog. The pet deteriorates slowly. This is a German Shepherd. And when I went away, I was living over at my aunt's ranch, went away to graduate school. When school started, the dog was still mobile and okay. I come back like 6 weeks later, and the whole back end was paralyzed, and she was dragging her paws. And you see, Ann didn't see that slow deterioration. And I said, it's time to put boots down. She said, thanks for making a decision. Sometimes it's better to have somebody else make the decision, but you've got to say to yourself, does this dog have any quality of life? Yeah, there's a point where you're prolonging suffering.
Yeah.
See, what happens is, this is what I call bad becoming normal. It slowly gets worse. But I saw it because I'd been away for 6 weeks.
Yes.
And then when I came back, I go, well, the whole back end of the dog is paralyzed.
Thank you.
Okay. This young man here.
Yeah, thank you. What affects autistic people more than other things?
Well, sometimes there's sensory sensitivities, and I was real sensitive to loud noise. We used to go on a ferry boat that I hated the horn. Sometimes a really loud noise, you can get over it if you make the noise. So let's say you don't like the hairdryer or the vacuum cleaner, where you turn it on and off. You know what they should have done with me on that ferry boat? Take me up to the captain's wheelhouse and say, now you pull the cord. No, I'm serious. Oh, I'm serious. Because this helped the kid get over the fear of the buzzer on a scoreboard. They took him down to the gym when nobody was there and let him play with a button, and he started playing tunes on it. You see, it's an excessive startle response. So sometimes if you initiate that sound, you have to control. When you have control of it, that can be helpful. I still have some problems with that. I also have problems with hearing when there's background noise. Never have been able to hear speech clearly when there's background noise.
Sir.
Yeah, good to see another person autistic, but Temple Grandin, like I'm thinking about that machine you use at slaughterhouse, like how it's used to reduce resistance of cow before they're put down, but like also thinking about the costs, short-term versus long-term. Like, for all I know, your machine might be expensive, very expensive in the short term, but it could save a lot of money in the long term.
So your hug machine, you want to talk about that?
Well, when I got into puberty, I started having horrible panic attacks.
No, I'm talking about the cattle machine.
And for cattle. Okay,
well, if you want to see how that works, you can look it up on Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin.
Hardly.
It shows it there.
It's hardly. I'm talking about costs, money.
Well, first of all, one of the big center track restrainer system that I worked on developing is for large plants. And, yeah, they can pay for it easily.
Yeah, like I meant.
Basically, way you sell equipment is to say, well, okay, it takes less labor to operate it, better safety, less bruises. And they want a 3-year payout on a capital investment.
Yeah, so it basically does indeed. It's a bit expensive, but can save a lot of money in the long run.
Right, that's a good summary. Thank you for your question. Yeah.
Yep.
So over here.
Hi, I'm going for English adolescent education, so I want to be a high school English teacher. What would have helped you with your high school English classes as an autistic person?
Well, actually, a teacher read marking up my paper helped me a whole lot, and that wasn't bad for my self-esteem. That's how I learned English. And when I was, English was never a problem for me. Algebra was the problem.
Okay.
In fact, writing was very important for my career because I wrote about a project. I would explain how to build it, how to design it, how to handle the cattle. And I look back at a lot of the things I've done. Writing was extremely important, and I had good writing skills, and I want to thank the teachers who marked up my work and made me write book reports, because that gave me good writing skills.
So is marking up papers, you know, with a lot of red ink?
And I've done it to graduate students.
Yeah.
I've done it to graduate students, and I said, I'm going to take your writing from awful to usable. And the other thing that I found helped them is make them read it out loud. Read their stuff out loud, because I just want a nice, clear description of how you did your experiment. How'd you house your cattle? What'd you feed them? Just describe it in clearly. And I'm finding out that they're not teaching writing in school. I can't believe the run-on sentences, extra words that don't make much sense put in it. I said, you wouldn't say it that way.
So us teachers should go at these papers savagely with a red pen. Basically.
Well, it can be done, but then you have to go back and correct it, you see, and then they can see how to correct it. But that's how I learned how to write. I thank the teachers who did that, and then I had to go back and redo it.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I know you grew up, I'm just going to take this off if that's okay. You grew up in an era where special education services were not provided to children, and my understanding is that you were really lucky. You grew up in a family where your family really taught you a lot of things and gave you a lot of opportunities. So I'm wondering what you would suggest for parents nowadays or for school nowadays. What would be particularly helpful things?
Okay, let's just start with some age differences. Early intervention is extremely important. It's my understanding New York now has got services for early intervention. That's really important. And my mother went to a neurologist, and the neurologist recommended two teachers that did speech therapy in the basement of their house. And they were really good teachers. And then I went to a small school. Also in the 50s, this is something that all kids did, manners were taught in a much more structured way. Just everybody in the neighborhood did that. Like if I went over to the next door neighbors for dinner and I put my finger in my drink to stir it, they'd say use the spoon. Grown-ups corrected little kids to tell them what the behavior they should have. And then when we were 6 or 7 years old, you had to put on your good clothes, and when the parents had a party, greet the guests and serve the snacks. That taught social skills. That was not just my family. Now, in the 50s, the real severe kids, they just put them in an institution. And I had no speech till age 4. I was the type of kid that normally would have just been put in an institution. But some of the more verbal kids, you had all the hands-on classes, and they'd go into shop. There's a tendency to think, well, if you don't go to college, you haven't been successful. I worked with brilliant people building big, complicated stuff that barely graduated from high school, and they were visual thinkers. Yeah, the next time all the wiring falls down, you're going to need us to put it back up.
Sir.
Hello, Dr. Grandin. So, you seem like, maybe I'm wrong, but you seem like a very street smart person in the sense that you've not let too many people take advantage of you, and if so, it's not been for very long. Well, I have to admit, in 39 years, that's not really gotten a ton better for me. My family once sent me out to get groceries with a lot of money, and they jokingly said that I'd probably return with a handful of magic beans, and I've been a victim of catfishing 3 times. The first time was 17 for 6 months at least, and the most recent time, I can't prove it was catfishing, but I ended up driving to another state, 3 hours round trip, and it was not a big deal for the other person. So my question is, how do we kind of shake my peers and myself out of that naivete and teach them the facts of life, that when a gorgeous woman just contacts you out of the blue, it's probably a hoax. Things like that don't happen to normal people like me.
Well, there's some instruction. I can tell you, like on all the scam calls and stuff, I can tell you my default setting is scam, period. And this is where someone has to instruct you.
Yes.
Because I just can't believe all the scam phone calls I get. Fake IRS, fake car insurance, fake this and that.
I always answer the phone and string them along, pretending to fall for it, knowing that they're not targeting someone else. And unfortunately, when I try to stop my peers who are in the depths of the catfishing scams, they block me, and first they say WTF. We all know what that means. And one time I tried to stop a big scam that was affecting people with disabilities, and I'm 99% sure I know who's been doing this. Okay. And the mother is in such denial that she practically threatened to come after me. So, and one more thing, the police cannot do anything, and I'm working on Bailey's Law with my friend Gay Marie Cannon. He killed himself over $300 that was stolen from him, and the law is just going to say this guy killed himself over just $300, and they're not going to care.
I'm so sorry to hear about all this. Are folks with autism more easily taken advantage of? Folks on the spectrum, do you feel that they are more vulnerable, and therefore we need to protect them from being
what they need to do is learn that the stuff's out there, and there's a lot of garbage out on the internet. You see, I was brought up in an era where I wasn't exposed to anywhere near as much of this stuff. You didn't have all this stuff going on the internet. That also, I was brought up in an era where I didn't see grown-ups behaving badly very often. That's certainly not true today.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi there, Temple. I'm the mother of a 16-year-old on the spectrum who is more in the Asperger's side of it. One of the big issues I've always had is I understand where she's coming from, and I try to educate myself a lot, but it seems like each year I'm having to, and I try to let her know that she's 16, do it on her own, but even her own father doesn't accept her diagnosis because she's so normal and she is socially aware of what's going on, so that stuff hurts her feelings. And so I guess, how did you do it? Like, did you just...
I'm trying to figure out what the question is.
Sure. So, like, meaning when you're dealing with people that, you do need a little help sometimes, or a little understanding, but they look at you as a normie, which is the term we use in our house for people like me. So how do I help her with that when even it's her own father that tells her, you're using that as an excuse? For example, time management skills, something that she really struggles with. She's 16 now. They get frustrated and yell at her and say, you're 16, you've been through this a million times. And I understand.
Well, one of the things, one of the problems is if I was a computer, I'd be an Intel 286, so I have no working memory, but I've got a lot of long-term memory. Yeah. Well, things like checklists can be helpful. If I had to get a job in an ice cream shop and I got to tear down the ice cream machine and clean it, I would, even now today, need a checklist. Tear down steps, cleaning steps, reassembly steps, like a pilot's checklist, because I cannot remember long strings of sequential information.
Yeah. Did you have?
Well, then you make checklists.
Yeah. Did you have like family members or people though that, you know, didn't understand where you were always coming from, that they were almost mean to you at times because they couldn't grasp why your brain was going that way when they were telling you over and over again?
The biggest problem I had in high school was bullying.
Yeah.
And the only places I was not bullied was where I had friends who shared interests, things like horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Elon Musk was also bullied. Shut down the stairs, had his face smashed in, had to have surgery. But she needs to get, you know, some kind of friends who some kind of special interest.
Okay. Thank you.
I believe that the question may have been, what do you do when there are folks in the family who won't accept or recognize an autism diagnosis? I think this sometimes happens with grandparents, when people do not recognize that there is anything that needs to be addressed, any assistance that's required.
Well, sometimes it's easier to address it on a specific need, like needing the pilot's checklist for tasks that involve sequence, needing a quiet place to work, sensory oversensitivity. Right. See, the problem with an autism diagnosis, it's not precise like a COVID variant diagnosis. That would be a very precise diagnosis.
Right.
And so you see, I want to break it down more as to where are the problems. You see, where I can visualize a specific problem.
Sure.
And then deal with it.
Yeah.
But I had, you know, I had some good mentors, and also, people just need to explain, well, these are the rules for different things to avoid problems.
Right. So we're not going to get to all of the questions. We will take a few more. But I just want to let you know, again, we are going to have a signing table, and you will get an opportunity to speak very briefly, because we'll need to keep the line moving, with Temple Grandin here on this stage. So if you don't get to ask a question, you may have the opportunity later. So, ma'am.
Well, one of the things that I always try to emphasize to people is all the positive things. I mean, we wouldn't even have these microphones if it wasn't probably for someone on the spectrum. Right. See, that's the problem, is a little bit of autism. You lose some of the social skills, but you get inventing skills, right? Doing things skills. I mean, someone like Michelangelo or Einstein or Edison was probably autistic.
Right.
I always tell people those sorts of things.
Absolutely.
The thing we've got to do also is develop strengths, also broaden interests. An autistic person's a bottom-up thinker. You have to fill the database. So if the kid just stays in his room and plays video games all day, well, you're not putting much information in the database that's useful. This is why getting them out doing things. And I worked with a lot of people that you consider really weird that actually had very successful businesses. And even had a corporate jet, and they were super weird. And they built up that business based on equipment that they had invented for the food industry.
Right. So we will take just a few more. So, ma'am, yes.
You mentioned earlier about mentoring, and you just mentioned a moment ago also about mentoring. And I think you were primarily referring to other people mentoring an autistic person. But is there value also in the autistic person or child even being a mentor, say, to his peers about a particular skill?
Well, yes, that would be valuable.
That would help with the autistic person's acceptance in the larger group.
Well, that's right. That would be helpful. In my own case, of course, materials are very sparse. But the things that I found that helped me the most in terms of things I read were first-person accounts from other autistic people. I have a book called Different Not Less, and it's 18 people on the spectrum describing problems with relationships, jobs, in their own words. I found first-person accounts extremely helpful. The other thing I found helpful was the brain research. That was really helpful. And the mentors that helped me, I think it's interesting, when I got out in the business world, that there were two former military officers, sort of calm, no-nonsense, Jim the contractor, and Norb, the superintendent of the Swift beef packing plant. I kind of made my own self-made internship there, and they let me just go over there every Tuesday afternoon for 3 years. And I didn't even know that Nord was a military officer until he died, and I read his obituary. But it's sort of a no-nonsense, very practical, calm. And when Jim was forming his construction company, he had a really diverse bunch of people there that were good at doing different things.
And you yourself are a mentor. I mean, you're teaching very large classes. You're well known in Colorado for giving generously of your time to students. What is it like for you as a mentor, not just someone?
Well, I want to see my students get out there and be successful. I'm really proud of the fact I've got 3 students that are college professors. I've got students out working in the meat industry, students working with buyers on animal welfare. You know, they've gotten into a lot of really good fields.
Yeah. Sir.
Yeah, hi. I have a 42-year-old son, and it seems like I've spent most of my life trying to arrange some of these mentorships with him or something that might work with him, because he's so anxious, and he's a word-oriented person, very intelligent, and can write profusely, but he's spent his time rearranging his life in his own manner, because he can't fit in, even sleep patterns. He says, well, my cells in my eyes, the cones are different, so I'm more alert at night. So try everything, and he was not properly diagnosed with autism. They said it was mental illness, but it's for the parents, it's very mystifying too. And as far as work, I've always tried to get him to do things with me, but he'd be there for 5 minutes, and even something like stacking firewood, next thing he'd be off watching butterflies. So you never could get him to do anything that was structured.
So is the question, how can he find a mentor?
So how do people like this?
I got to know a lot more about him. I'll talk a little bit. I had terrible anxiety. And I've been on antidepressant medication for 40 years. And it totally changed my life. I also have to do 100 sit-ups every night. I'll do them tonight in the hotel. I don't like doing them, but I find that helps with my sleeping at night. And my book, Thinking in Pictures. If anxiety is an issue, I'd strongly recommend getting Thinking in Pictures and reading a chapter, because I don't want any misunderstanding about medication. There's way too many medications given out to little kids like candy. That's absolutely horrible. But on the other hand, I don't think I'd be here tonight, and I would have gotten those dipping vat projects shown in the movie done, but then my health was falling apart from the anxiety. A little bit of the right medication can really make a difference.
Okay.
And I'm not saying he should be on medication. I just want you to read that chapter and make your decisions.
Do you mind sharing what medication?
Yep, the medication I'm on is an old-fashioned one called disipramine. It's an old-fashioned tricyclic antidepressant at a very low dose. And I also know a lot of visual thinkers take a very low dose of Prozac. It's also being used on dogs a lot too. And the mistake that's made with a drug such as Prozac is too high a dose. You get too high a dose, you'll get insomnia and agitation. And that's just explained completely in Thinking in Pictures.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks.
So I think we'll be able to take 3 more questions, and I apologize to those of you who have been waiting for an opportunity to ask questions, but this woman over here, yes.
Hello. I'm a 15-year-old girl on the spectrum. I really look up to you, and I want to go into the field of biology, but I find I have a lot of trouble in school, especially, as you said, algebra, that I barely passed that last year. A lot of troubles. My parents have been fighting the school system for years. For me, you can probably see right now I'm fiddling with something in my hands. I have a lot of sensory struggles. How do you think would be an appropriate way to go about advocating for myself in school and in the workplace?
Well, in the algebra stuff, I don't even know if I could graduate from high school today. So I've often thought, what would I do if someone waved a magic wand and made me 18, so I'm old enough for any job, and I had the knowledge I had now? Well, I'd head right for the nearest factory and learn every job on the floor, because my goal would be designing the next one. And I have seen people do that career route. There's a huge back door. And I'm really concerned about this algebra stuff, because you're blocking out the people that are going to be, keeping the power grid going. And this is some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this new book I'm working on visual thinking. We need it. I just read an article about fusion power, and up to the physicists are going to design that. But if they want to cool that system with liquid helium, that's not going to work, because you deplete the world's supply of helium. I don't think the physicists even thought of that. But I know enough industrial stuff. But I've seen a lot of people just kind of go in the back door and work up. And the things I needed at work, I can tell you right now, it's not algebra. My writing skills served me very well. And the old-fashioned arithmetic, the way it used to be taught up through 6th grade. I know how to size hydraulic cylinders. I know how to do that.
And what if
but it's a real problem, because algebra doesn't make any sense to me. And maybe let these kids go on and do geometry. So fortunately, when I went to college in '67, finite math was a class, and it was matrices, probability, and statistics. And with piles of tutoring, I got through it. It isn't quite as abstract.
What about just, for the benefit of this 15-year-old, what about just, how do you find the courage to advocate for yourself, to say this isn't working for me?
Well, this is, first of all, that's too vague.
Yeah.
All right, that's way too vague. All right, we got to talk about the specific problem. Okay, so algebra is one of the specific problems. One approach is tons of tutoring.
Tons of tutoring.
Tons of tutoring. And the other thing, this is what I did. I flunked the first quiz in finite math. I got tutored. And then I got through statistics with tons of tutoring from another graduate student. But I asked for help before I totally trashed the class.
So would you recommend that this young woman demand help?
Well, I have to figure out exactly what the problem is.
Yeah.
This is the thing.
Right.
You see, I don't have enough information. This is where the verbal mind overgeneralizes. But I got to find out, so is algebra the only problem, or is there some other problem? You see, you've talked about this other than the algebra, not in a specific way.
Right, right. Do you have any specifics you want to share? I'm going to let you ask a second question.
I guess I struggle a lot with abstract thinking. As you said, I was trying to keep this short.
All right, what kind of abstract thinking? You see, because the way I've learned things, I'm a bottom-up thinker. And when I was your age, I didn't have very much data in the database. But the more stuff I read, so give me an example of abstract thinking.
I really like aquariums. There's something fascinating about them to me, and understanding how every little bacteria colony in an aquarium can keep the fish alive is really interesting. And then when I go to school and something like English class and I need to write an essay on human rights in France, I can't.
Okay, but let's say on human rights. Let's do something specific. Okay, I have students that want to do social justice, and I said, well, let's do something specific, like using DNA testing to prove that some guy didn't commit the crime, for example. You see, that's something that's specific. You see, instead of talking about human rights in the abstract, let's talk about some specific event that was either bad for human rights or good for it. You see, your mind thinks in specifics. You know, like there's a lot of discrimination going on. I'll tell you one thing that's really bad. The resume studies, they're hideous. Absolutely hideous. Another thing that was in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books was women being discriminated against in music. And if you put the lady instrument player behind a curtain, she did as well as the guys. They could see her. She didn't do as well as the guys. Okay, you see, now that's something specific. You see, this is the thing. You got to have to do an essay on human rights, but you do it on something specific. That's right. You see, then it's not abstract anymore. That's great. Wow. And then I take a whole bunch of specific examples and I group them into categories like on a spreadsheet. Like let's take jobs for people with autism. bad jobs, McDonald's takeout window, chaotic store during the holidays, good jobs. These are ones that work. Office supply store, auto parts store, clothing store when it's not really busy, ice cream shop. Then, okay, now what do those jobs have in common? They don't have as much multitasking.
I actually work doing alterations on wedding gowns.
Oh, nice.
And I really enjoy that because it's so...
Alterations on wedding gowns. She does
alterations on wedding gowns. Okay, yeah. When I was 13, my mother got me a sewing job where the seamstress that worked out of her home, and I took apart dresses and I hand-hemmed them.
That's about what I do.
But you see, but the thing to do on something abstract, like let's say write an essay on human rights, is to find something specific that's either good or bad human rights. Then it's no longer abstract.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good job.
All right, so two more questions, so quickly, ma'am, yes?
All right, hi Temple. I'm a primary special ed teacher, and most of my career has been affected by the pandemic. So I was curious if you have a piece of advice for teachers teaching in today's world of education, and more specifically, how could you explain to kids why other kids need different things, as in fair versus equal?
In other words, why one kid might need help with reading, for example?
Kind of explaining to kids why other kids might have certain accommodations or modifications.
All right, that's vague. Tell me the accommodation. That's too abstract.
How come a kid gets to use a fidget toy and another kid can't?
Wait a minute, I didn't...
A fidget?
A fidget toy. How come one kid gets to use a fidget toy and the other kid does not have permission?
Kids can't have it. Well, something like a fidget toy, probably gonna let everybody have that.
Yeah. Well,
that was the first... But you see...
That was the first that came to mind.
And the thing that's interesting is you go to trade shows and there's a fidget toy for every trade. The psychiatry meeting had brains. They had... I've got some really strange fidget toys. Oil field equipment fidget toys. I am not kidding. I have a bull dressed in a suit fidget toy from a meat company. Little cattle, little pigs. Every industry's got their fidget toys.
Right, and so how do we explain to, let's say, neurotypical kids that non-neurotypical kids are allowed certain permissions, certain accommodations?
I would do it by specific accommodation.
Right.
Okay, and something like fidget toys, but let's say extra time on tests.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, let's take something specific like that.
And how do you explain that?
There's a slower computer processor. It's like the phone, the brain works more slowly. Then they can have them look up an Intel 286. But you see, it's going to be easier to explain it if the kid asks about some specific accommodation.
Okay.
Why they have to have it.
Thank you.
Dr. Grandin, you opened my mind up to visual thinking. I'm a mom of this big guy behind me who's going to graduate this year from Koplik with a degree in animal science, which is fantastic. Really thrilled. Yes,
wonderful.
It's been long in coming, but it's good. And he's on the spectrum. But I also run a school for special education, a number of individuals with autism. So what I'm interested in is we support them on the checklist, everything you talked about, including my son. But what about those other soft skills that are getting along with others, understanding what's happening in the lunchroom, right? Understanding when
somebody has to explain it to them.
Right. Okay. So that's
what you have to explain each thing, and it's like training somebody for a foreign country.
Okay.
Where the culture is different. Mm-hmm. Kind of look at it like that.
Okay. Excellent.
And the other thing is, the more experience is getting jobs and things like that. But just explain it matter-of-factly.
How did people explain it to you?
Well, let's look at one common problem is carrying on a conversation with the professor in the class. Mm-hmm. I had a rule, no more than 2 questions per class period. Or things where you bore people going on and on and on talking about your favorite subject.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I have a rule. You can tell that story about the world's worst, funniest vomit flight twice, and that's it.
2 times rule. That's it.
Yes, so now I've been on that flight. New York to Phoenix, and it was terrible.
So talking about limits on questions, will you take a couple more?
Yeah,
Can we bend the
okay, I'll
rules?
do a couple more.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
You'll take a couple more?
I'll take a couple more.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi. Yeah, good evening. I didn't really have a question, but how are you today?
Okay. So that's it?
Yeah.
Just how are you? How are you? That's a question.
Thank you for being here.
Well,
I've learned
thank
a lot.
you for
just
coming.
standing
Thank
up.
you for
Yeah.
coming.
Okay. Sir, yeah.
Like the woman before me said, I am her son and I am on the autism spectrum. One thing I've always struggled with, and even now that as a 25-year-old, is public speaking. I always gotten very nervous because I was the bullied one when I was in middle school, high school. What did you do to become, because I've seen you talk on TED Talks, doing stuff like this. What did you do to make yourself more comfortable with getting up in front of a bunch of people and talking?
Okay, let's just start off with my very first talk I did in graduate school, I panicked and walked out. No, I'm serious. And one thing I learned, have really good slides. And then if you panic, you go to the next slide and that will cue you. And that's helped a lot. And if you have to do a talk without slides, make a checklist with the bullet points of what you're going to talk about.
Got it.
And then that helps a lot. And that's also going to help with the rambling. The other thing with things I was afraid of, I used to be terrified of airplanes. And the way I got over that was to make them interesting. And I got to ride in the cockpit of a large plane taking heifers to Puerto Rico. And this was early 70s, Miami cargo department, let me tell you. Every way to torture an airplane, they did it and they still flew. And I figure if they can still fly after they did all these terrible things to them, it became interesting. Like they let cows go to the bathroom all over planes, and they still worked.
So overcome your fears by making those things interesting.
Well, but I was terrified of airplanes. I was in a very scary emergency landing when I was a senior, where we had to go down those emergency chutes. and sometimes you're afraid of something, you've got to make it interesting. But I think having good PowerPoint presentation, but don't read your slides, and having a checklist with bullet points if you don't have slides, where you go down and those bullet points will jog your memory, like keywords on Google. Right. And I think that will help you.
So the folks who didn't get to ask questions, I'm going to invite you guys to line up on that side. You can be first in line. So if you want to, for the signing table, which is going to be here, the folks who didn't get to ask their questions, if you just line up over there, and then you'll get to come up and talk to Temple Grandin. Thunderous round of applause.